Well, I can't promise to be as entertaining as the Republican convention, but I'll try to make it interesting. I didn't want to title my talk with a question, but really I'm asking, can we get to 100% renewables, and if so, how? Because people smarter than me say we can, but equally smart people say we can't. I mean, just today I read a couple of articles I got via email saying, no, we can't. Well, even experts believe what they want to believe and what they're trained to believe. And I think it depends a lot on their attitude to climate change. If you believe that we are facing a planetary emergency and we've got to do something about it, then you will decide, yes, we can do it. Although in some cases you might make some generous assumptions, stretch the envelopes of what's possible, and glide by some of the real world obstacles getting it done. Or then you could be like the hard-headed pragmatists at the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, which is a statistical arm of the Department of Energy. They say that by 2040 we'll be at 18% renewables. But then they're assuming that we won't really try. So what are lay people like us to think? And I'm an English major turned lawyer. I'm not an expert on technology. So, it's too important to be left to the experts. The experts disagree. We got to make up our own minds based on the best information we can find. Can we do it? My answer is yes, we can, but with some qualifications about exactly what it is that we can do. I'm not one of those people who thinks that climate change is a technical problem with a purely technological solution. It should be obvious to everybody that it is a huge political problem, and that at bedrock it is a behavioral problem, a social problem. People say they care, but not enough to do anything. So before I go on, a note about megawatts and kilowatts. I think a lot of people probably don't have a clear idea of the scale of those things. We all know a watt is a very small unit of power, 60-watt light bulbs, 40-watt light bulbs. A megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. That's utility scale power. Coal and nuclear plants are sized in hundreds of megawatts, or even a few thousand megawatts. Wind farms get into the hundreds of megawatts, and solar farms are more likely single-digit megawatts. A rough rule of thumb says the conventional wisdom that a megawatt is enough power for 1,000 homes. So divide a megawatt by 1,000 homes, that's 1 kilowatt, 1,000 watts per home. And if you put solar panels on your roof, it's likely in the 1 to 3 kilowatt range. We often hear that renewables are too expensive. Wrong. If you want to replace a dying coal plant with something new, the cheapest thing you can do is wind. Low energy technology. This is from Lazard, the investment bank. Every year they put out a report on the levelized cost of energy. That means not just the cost of building a plant, but the cost of running it through its lifetime. And that includes the fuel cost, which with wind and solar, of course, is 0. So here's the ranking, and by the way, this is unsubsidized. This shows that wind, hydro, utility scale, solar, they're the top 3, all renewables before you get to natural gas, the next competitor. And that's assuming that there are no tax credits. They're cost competitive even without them. Notice onshore wind, offshore wind. Offshore is much more expensive. That's important in some parts of the country, like the southeast, where the wind is very poor over the land, but there's plenty of wind out over the ocean. Next slide. Here's another, all of these levelized cost studies are somewhat different assumptions, different methods. This one is from the EIA, the aforementioned Energy Information Administration. Also unsubsidized. It shows at the very top another renewable technology, that's geothermal. This means hot rock geothermal, the kind of thing you could get in Iceland, or God forbid they should do an energy project in Yellowstone National Park. You got to have the right geology. Most of us don't have it. EIA gives a slight edge to something called advanced combined cycle natural gas, which I had never heard of before. It's not a new technology. It's just a tweaking of an old technology. Again, just one more levelized cost slide. The gray part of this bar here represents fuel cost. You can see that's a very large part of the cost of natural gas. And as the price of natural gas goes up, as it inevitably will, gas will lose whatever edge it still has. I want to also flag this, the long bar here, the very high cost of battery storage. I'm going to talk a little more about that in a while, and we need to get that down. What I mainly want to do with this slide is make a point about the cost of solar. It depends a lot on where you put solar panels. It's most expensive here. This is residential rooftop. It's less if you cluster a larger number of panels on, well, C&I stands for commercial and industrial, so an IKEA roof or a Walmart roof. That also goes for something called community solar, also known as solar gardens. So suppose you have a vacant lot on your block and you put solar panels on it and invite all the neighbors to subscribe to the electricity. That means that renters can get the benefits of solar, and people whose roofs aren't oriented right or are too shaded to put panels on their own house. But here's what I'm going to bring up one of those real world obstacles I mentioned briefly. If you do that, if you sell electricity at retail, you become a public utility, and you have to be regulated by the PSC, the Public Service Commission, which is where I do most of my work. So there have been a couple of bills introduced in the legislature over the last 2 years to remove that obstacle to community solar, and they have not succeeded. This is one of those things, it's not all for experts and technologists. There's a role for citizen action here. Politics. Let's vote the bums out so we can get some decent energy laws. Right now, the only way around that is to get the utility to buy your power, and good luck trying to get them to take it. It is cheapest here, way up just behind wind, utility solar. The utility can assemble a whole bunch of solar panels, megawatts, multi-megawatt solar panels, and that's cheaper. But if the utility does it, you have to pay them instead of generating your own electricity. So if you can finance rooftop solar, it will pay you back in free electricity. Now we can see the success of renewables in the real world. Recently, Kansas City Power and Light, KCPL, the utility on the other side of the state, announced that they would buy all the output from 2 new wind farms being built in Missouri. 500 megawatts, that's a good chunk of wind. And they're not doing it because somebody's making them do it, but because it just makes economic sense. I don't want to make a big hero out of KCPL because they're still a heavily coal-reliant utility, but they deserve an honorable mention compared to Ameren, which is doing virtually nothing with renewables. And there is a petition in the room that you can sign. It's at that little round table next to the camera telling Ameren to get their butts in gear and moving towards 100% renewables. So please stop over there and they'll circulate them through the crowd, I'm sure. In March, according to the EIA, coal's share of generation was down to under 24%, renewables at 19%. So renewables are approaching parity with coal. Of course, the big winner was natural gas. That's cheap fuel right now. And some people think natural gas is a bridge fuel. It will be the bridge from coal to when renewables are fully scaled up. I disagree with that. If we build all this natural gas infrastructure, it's going to have to run for 30 or 40 years to make the sales to pay off the debt they incurred in building it. We need to move directly to renewables. On May 15th, a Sunday, Germany got 82% of its electricity from renewables. That is not a world record. In March, Portugal got 100% of its electricity from renewables for 4 consecutive days. For all of 2015, Germany got 1/3 of its electricity from renewables. They're the leading country in the world for solar, despite the fact that they're at Canadian latitudes, not exactly a Saudi Arabia of solar. And here's another very important fact about Germany. The average German uses only 1/3 as much electricity as the average American. We're energy hogs in this country, and we need to do something about that. Glad you agree. Now I want to look at one particular plan for going 100% renewable. There are a lot of them floating around. This one I think is the best known, and it also provides us with individual roadmaps for each of the 50 states. It's done by a team of researchers led by Mark Jacobson of Stanford. He was here a few months ago speaking at SLU. And the acronym for this is WWS, which stands for Wind, Water, Sunlight. No fossil fuels, no nuclear power, just renewables. And really, hydro is insignificant in much of the world, including here. All the good dam sites are already taken. There isn't much room to add hydro, and it only makes up about 5% of this plan. So really, we should just call it WS, wind and solar. And why not? These are mature technologies. The prices have been coming down rapidly for years now. They're ready to go, and let's run with them. Now, the electricity sector is on the way. There's still a long way to go, and we need to keep the pressure on. But the WWS plan is much more ambitious. The aim is to electrify everything. Electrify transportation, heating of buildings, industry too. Now imagine what that means. We not only have to build all this renewable energy to replace power plants, we have to build mass transit. We have to swap out all our gasoline-powered cars for electric vehicles, or EVs. We have to swap out our filling station infrastructure with electric vehicle charging stations. We have to retrofit all our buildings with insulation and heat pumps and solar panels and heat exchangers and energy-efficient appliances. We got to build an awful lot of stuff. And at the bottom is the industrial sector, which is seldom mentioned. And this is where I think I have found a significant flaw in the Jacobson plan. At the risk of boring you, he says to convert industry to renewable electricity, we must use electrolysis of water to separate, that's just run electric current through water to separate the hydrogen and burn the hydrogen as an industrial fuel. Now, they don't say anything to explain why they would do this. And I went online trying to find support for this and couldn't find any. And I read a book by Joe Rome, a noted climate blogger, called The Hype About Hydrogen. He doesn't mention it as an industrial fuel either, but he did say that if we wanted to use hydrogen for transportation, like in hydrogen fuel cells and or compressed hydrogen, it would take more electricity than we currently generate in the entire country. So I think we got a problem there that still needs to be solved, because if we don't get our industrial sector running on renewables, then we're going to do it with fossil fuels and burn through what our dwindling carbon budget. Next slide. Let's look at the WWS plan for Missouri. All these technologies are listed, a lot of them don't apply. No offshore wind, obviously, no tidal turbines, no geothermal. It's really very simple. 60% wind, 1.1% hydro, and solar is broken into 4 categories, which add up to the remaining 38.9%. So really, we can just forget about hydro and regard this as a 60-40 mix of wind and solar. Next. I want to thank Mo Mills for putting together this PowerPoint for me. Jobs. This is Missouri alone. Obviously, there are plenty of jobs in the renewable energy field and in energy efficiency, retrofitting buildings to replace the jobs that might be lost from the fossil fuel industry. This big bar here represents our current energy demand. Not just electricity, but everything. You know, oil for transportation, coal and gas for industry and buildings. Over on the right, we have the renewable side. The -40 says that we can reduce that demand by 40% through efficiency. And then we only need to build that much renewables. Oh, it's still an awful lot. Next. I mentioned battery storage. These things that look like shipping containers are utility scale batteries. Wind and solar are variable. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun goes down every night. So we need backup. And batteries are one way to do it, the leading candidate for doing it. Electricity can't be stored. It can only be used as it's generated. So when we talk about energy storage, we mean that electrical energy is converted into another kind of energy, which in the case of batteries is chemical energy, and then reconverted to electricity as needed, so we can smooth out the amount of power on the grid, which is pretty sensitive to variations. I read just the other day that in 5 years we might see a 100 megawatt storage battery. That's a power plant. I mean, you compare that to your little AA battery, it's many orders of magnitude. It's pretty incredible. Now, as the previous slide said, we can get a long way towards our goal by reducing energy demand, energy efficiency, because no kilowatt hour is cheaper than the kilowatt hour that you don't use. And we rely on our utilities, unfortunately, to do energy efficiency programs to help us save energy. And next slide. 3 cheers for Ameren? No. But this is the good stuff Ameren is doing. This is the web portal to their residential efficiency programs. And you see how they basically work. It's through rebates. They will rebate you part of the cost of a heat pump, $2,000. An energy efficient appliance, a smart thermostat. They'll give you rebates on LED light bulbs, which are much more efficient and longer lasting than even compact fluorescent lights. So if you participate in one of these programs, you immediately start saving money on your bill. But there isn't enough room for everybody to participate, and if you don't, you pay. You can actually see on your bill an energy efficiency charge. It's not a very large one. Okay, so you pay so that other people can save money, right? Actually, everybody saves, because if the utility does enough efficiency, they don't have to build another power plant, and that's what you really pay through the nose for. Now, actually, it took some doing, because we have a 100-year-old utility regulatory system. It goes back to when the name of the game was electrification, and it pays them to build power plants. Efficiency is different. It's not a capital investment they can earn a profit on. It's an expense, and they earn no profit on that. On top of that, by efficiency, their sales are going down, so they'd be crazy to do it. Well, the law has to change, and a few years ago it did with MEA, the Missouri Energy Efficiency Investment Act. But unfortunately, MEA was written by a utility, KCPL, and it is purely voluntary, so they'll do what they want to do. It's part of my job is to negotiate with them, say, look, you can do better, you can do this, you can do that. If they don't like what's on offer, they can just take their ball and go home. So how are we doing? Next slide. Each year, the ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, puts out a scorecard ranking the 50 states in the District of Columbia for efficiency. Here we sit at number 44. Not so good. That's 2014, but we had the same rank in 2015. Our utilities really aren't serious about efficiency. They'd rather build power plants, which are bigger cash cows, don't cost them sales. They keep saying, no, we can't save very much energy. We can save maybe 0.7, 0.8% of our demand, which we know is false, because there are states, especially in the Northeast, that are saving 2 to 3% of their energy demand every year on year, through efficiency. What we need is a mandate. And I'm going to go back to my theme of politics here. I have worked with allies like the Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, and other experts to write a bill that would be an energy efficiency mandate, which about half of the states have. Actually, we've written a whole portfolio of clean energy bills that we can't get passed. We can find a sponsor, we can get them introduced, but they go nowhere. Vote the bums out. Next slide. Transmission. Nobody likes these things. In some cases, it's possible to bury transmission lines, but that's very expensive. And over the next few decades, we are going to be spending hundreds of billions of dollars on transmission. And that's even if we don't go with renewables. We got a creaky old grid. We need a smarter grid, a more cyber secure grid, a more reliable grid. And this is a big issue with wind. The best wind in the country comes from this tier of plains states from North Dakota down to Texas, and including northwest Missouri, which is pretty good wind country. But that's not where the people are. The people are on the coasts in the Great Lakes area, so we have to get the wind out of the plains to the population, and that's where transmission comes in. Now, you may have heard about this because they've been in the news lately. There's a company out of Houston called Cleanline that wants to build a series of wind transmission lines. Now, the way this works is the grid is AC, alternating current. These Cleanline lines would be DC, direct current. And that makes it possible for them to transport wind energy only. The AC grid has to accept all comers under federal rules, nuclear, coal, wind, whatever. But the Cleanline DC lines can be wind-only transmission lines. Now, one of these is called the Grain Belt Express, would run from southwest Kansas wind farms through northern Missouri, across Illinois to Indiana, and there it would deliver wind energy to the mid-Atlantic grid. Cleanline also says, though, it will drop off 500 megawatts in Ameren's territory, in Rawls County, south of Hannibal. That's equivalent to the 500 megawatts that Casey Bell says they'll buy. Ameren doesn't want it, by the way, because it can't make any money off it. Well, last year, the Missouri PSC rejected Cleanline, and this is after the other 3 states on the route, Kansas, Illinois, and Indiana, had all approved it. Missouri vetoed it. There was a very strong organized opposition consisting mainly of landowners along the route. Now, I understand nobody wants one of these things over their property, but priorities, people. I mean, global warming will do a lot worse than ruin your view. And I might add that these towers would not be as ugly as the ones I showed in the last slide. They might even be able to use single poles rather than those big lattice towers. Well, Cleanline is reapplying this year, probably about the beginning of September. They've ironed out some kinks. They've got Governor Nixon's support. And most important of all, there's a group of municipal utilities, or munis as we call them, that want to sign up for this power. These munis have been taken to the cleaners because they signed up for coal-fired power from the Prairie State plant over in Illinois. That was the brainchild of Peabody Coal, and now bankrupt Peabody Coal, and it was a big boondoggle. Now these munis realize that the cheapest energy they can get anywhere is this Cleanline wind. And I wish they had realized that last year and then told the PSC. So you can help. This is another area for citizen involvement. And last time, the public comment that the PSC received is overwhelmingly against the project. We need to reverse that ratio. So when they reapply, it would be great if all of you would just take a few minutes to file a comment through the PSC website. And if you'll please sign our sign-up sheet, leave your email address, we would love to be able to contact you later and ask you to take that step. Next. Let's turn to transportation. Electric vehicles, EVs, are coming along. They present a chicken and egg problem. You know, nobody can buy an EV without a place to charge it. No one will build charging stations without enough EVs to charge. Right now, 85% of all charging is done at home. And we need them in workplaces, at apartment buildings, and out on the highway for long distance charging. Well, the utilities smell a market here, and we have complementary proposals from KCPL and Ameren. KCPL wants to build 1,100 charging stations in the Kansas City area. Ameren has just recently announced a pilot project to put 7 charging stations along a 150-mile stretch of I-70 between here and Boonville. Just a pilot, so yeah, it's just a start. Okay. Well, embarrassing?
That's embarrassing.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there are issues to be worked out here. The price of EVs is falling, like below the $30,000 threshold now, and charging with electricity is much cheaper than filling up with gas because electric motors are so much more efficient than gasoline engines. There are a few issues here, though. Like one of them is this the kind of service we want our monopoly utilities to be offering? After all, when we're out there buying gas, we at least appreciate the apparent price competition between the oil companies to keeping the price of gas down. If you got a monopoly utility doing it, that just doesn't seem right. Also, given Missouri's energy mix, which is over 80% coal, driving an EV is the equivalent of driving, in greenhouse gas terms, equivalent to driving a 36 miles per gallon car, which is not so hot. I mean, compared to the federal fuel efficiency standards, which are supposed to be moving up to 54 miles a gallon. Not to mention you can do a lot better than that right now with a hybrid. So what we need is EVs that we can charge entirely on renewable energy. And if you've got one and you're charging it off your own rooftop solar panels, then you're doing it right. So let me just wrap up now and open it up for questions. Electrifying everything is a very tall order, and I believe it is unnecessary. If we could do it, we shouldn't do it. What we need to do is 3 things, and strictly in this order. Number 1 is conservation. Conserve energy means just using less energy. We use so much in this country. Remember those Germans, you only use 1/3 as much as we do, electricity. I often wonder if there's anything we can't do without artificial energy, whether it's opening a can, brushing our teeth, raking the leaves, you name it, we find a way to do it with fossil fuels. And that's the missing part of the Jacobson WWS plan. They don't talk about conservation. They think that we can have everything we got now with just renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. And I don't think it's that simple. Second thing we need to do is reduce demand further with energy efficiency. And there's overlap between conservation and efficiency. If you're doing something with more efficient appliance, you are conserving energy. But the definition of efficiency is you're getting the same service, whether it's cooking, refrigeration, clothes washing, getting the same service for less energy. So there's no sacrifice whatsoever involved. It's just common sense. You're saving money as well as energy. So once we've done those things, conservation and efficiency, we've got the waste out of the system. And we have such a wasteful economy and lifestyle. I mean, which waste goes against every ethical and religious principle I can think of. Let's get waste out of the system, and then it will be much easier to go to step 3, which is all the energy we need will be renewable. Thank you, and I'll open it up for questions.